Welcome back to the Skinny on Wall Street with Kristen and Jen. This is Kristen.
I'm Jen.
And this is our second weekly podcast episode where we give you the skinny on anything going on in the markets or things that we happen to think is interesting at the time. And so today is July 4th. So we're going to try to keep this a little bit short. But we did see an article recently that was interesting and actually speaks to a lot of questions that we get from you guys. We get probably we get lots of questions that are constant, but one very common question is basically, what should I study if I want to get a job on Wall Street? And, there's the obvious answers, which is like, you should study finance because that's what you're actually going to be doing on the job. Jen and I obviously each had non-finance degrees. Jen was an English major at Princeton. I was an engineering major at Brown. But there was an article recently that Jen sent over to me that was just very interesting, talking about how BlackRock and a number of firms are starting to prioritize hiring liberal arts majors, specifically like humanities majors. Which, by the way, I wanted to clarify because econ is technically a humanities, which I find wild, but we're talking more like English and writing. I don't know if there's a writing major, but writing,
history philosophy, yeah.
And so it's interesting in light of, the trend that was sort of the case when we had started was people were starting to look more and more at, especially STEM majors. And again, I obviously happen to be engineering. I am very pro STEM, not because, look, you're going to need to figure out like the electricity charge of something like you're working on the trading floor, but studying some of those, whether it's computer science, whether it's engineering, applied math, it does give you, well, two things. One, it does kind of teach you how to think in a very structured way and problem solve. And then B, usually if you can demonstrate that you are able to do well in the sort of more traditionally difficult classes, then it sort of speaks to your intellect and your IQ, if you will. I do think, though, there's been now, for a few reasons, there's been this shift to wanting more humanities majors. And Jen, do you want to talk a little bit about what the article was saying?
Yeah, I thought it was a really interesting article. It was an interview with the COO of Blackrock. And what he said is that the rise of AI is going to render all of the people who had come up through STEM programs effectively redundant in a lot of ways, that their skill sets no longer offered as much as people who were able to think creatively outside the box in a more narrative way. And specifically, the quote from actually someone at IBM Consulting was, questioning creativity skills and innovation are going to be hugely important because I think AI is going to free up more capacity for creative thought processes. And the COO of BlackRock was very careful to say in this article that, listen, 25% of their hires still come from quant and computing backgrounds because there is still a massive hiring need on that front. But they've said that their conviction is that they want more intellectual diversity and more variety in ideas. And I think that push for intellectual diversity and difference of thought and creative thinking is just an important trend that thought leaders have been speaking to us about pretty consistently now over the past year that we've been having these conversations. And to see that playing out now in the press, and this is not new, executives say this quite often, but I do think that it is symbolic of a change in attitudes. And I think it's really interesting that it was sparked by the rise in AI.
Yeah, I don't know. I disagree that like AI coming of whatever is going to mean that people now need to be creative, because unfortunately, like when the AI has figured out how to do all that shit, they're going to be creative too. Like I do think that it's coming for all jobs equally, whether you're a creator on Instagram or you are a quant. I think unfortunately it's coming for everybody, but that's my 2 cents. But I think in general, it definitely makes sense that you want people who think differently, right? I think Jen and I, we work so well together because I am much more analytical and like, again, structured in my thinking in terms of like solving problems and whatever. And you are just such a great communicator. And it's like, it's a superpower. I mean, we need any email written or we need to express something in a clear and concise way. And it's like, you are able to do that with you were just so good at doing that. I think you're a very good networker. And at the end of the day, I mean, one of the things that I've never really understood is that at the, as you get to the senior levels in whether it's banking or a lot of these roles, it is a sales job. So it does seem that you should want people that are good, or you want people who are good communicators, effective communicators, who are not just someone like sitting in a cube, like being a quant. Or so that's always to me been like the most obvious thing. Like, of course you want people that are English majors and history majors and philosophy majors to kind of think about the broader questions. So again, it's sort of like cool that you figured out that you probably should be hiring these people, but also like, I don't know, that seems obvious.
I think what it's
That's my
more
2 cents.
about is the resumes all look the same. We have so many people sending us their resumes, and they do. It's these analyst classes, and I've said this a million times, could be filled 100 times over with people who are 4.0 finance majors. What else you got? What is going to make me want to sit next to you for 12 to 14 hours a day? And cool if you're a finance major, but you also happen to be, I don't know, an expert in ancient Greek literature, or you're also super passionate about something else. Do something different. And I think what Rob Goldstein's really saying is, I don't need you to go out and study, whatever it is, right? Read all the Thomas Hardy novels, right? And read, I don't care how many times you've read Jane Eyre. That's not going to necessarily help you with a career on Wall Street. They want people who approach things in a novel, unique, creative way, rather than, okay, I know how to input these numbers. I know what the formula is going to spit out. That's what I think it's really getting down to.
Yeah, I mean, I guess though, like there's not a single thing that I learned in engineering that I used for working in finance, because again, I do think that the 2 things that those STEM majors do is it teaches you how to think. It shows that you're a hard worker. It shows that you've got grit to like work through the hard stuff, to put in the time. And so whether you were a computer science major, I mean, sure, some of that could be applicable, but for the most part, a lot of the STEM stuff I think is less about learning something that then AI can do. Like, sure, okay, I'm not doing anything that I learned in school, but it's the applicability. And the one thing that I will say is, to the extent, as you said, as you can get yourself to be different. There were not a lot of women who were engineers who were getting good grades. Like, there just weren't. I mean, and that was just, unfortunately, maybe that has now since changed. So
definitely,
for me, doing STEM was something that, but
made you different.
It was something that was different. I am curious how many people ultimately graduate with, say, a mechanical engineering degree or an electrical engineering degree or a chemical engineering degree. I still think it is highly skewed towards men. I could be wrong, and I would love to see the stats. I hope that it is now more women. There was a very even balance when I started going into engineering. The class was even, and then it was sort of like what we see in finance for whatever reason, that there started to be attrition. So I do think a lot of women come in and say, I want to do engineering, and that I'm curious if they stay with it. But on the flip side, it's like if you're a guy, if you're studying history or whatever, I mean, because there's maybe less men who tend to go into some of those more liberal arts majors, I do think that makes you stand out. It's like, ultimately, as you said, if you look exactly the same on paper as every other person, 4.0 finance major, 4.0 whatever it is, and like that's all you do, that's boring, because you look the same as every other person. So to whatever extent you can do something different, you are a video creator in your spare time, or, you're going to Olympic trials for some sport. You are that history major who, by the way, can ace all the questions about finance because you've learned it in your spare time. Like, to the extent that you can make yourself different, that is what sets you apart. Again, just do something different. Don't do something different. Like,
and also, I think I think what some of it is at its core is when I think about what you learn to do in a science class, you learn how to take a formula, see what inputs are going into it, see what comes out, and learn a very, like you said, systematic way of thinking. What you learn in the humanities is to take something that is open to multiple interpretations and overlay your analytical abilities on that to draw a conclusion that somebody else might draw the exact opposite conclusion and be able to defend that thinking rigorously.
I agree.
Rather than saying, okay, we all know how to get to the right answer, right? When I interview kids for college every year, the thing that drives me nuts is the number of kids who tell me that they love math and science. And I say, why? And they all have the exact same answer. They say, because there's one right answer. I think what Rob Goldstein is saying is I want people who look at things and say there are multiple right answers, I am going to come
Yeah.
up with a thesis about why this is the right answer. That is a skill that I know AI is going to be able to replicate that skill eventually, but it's a lot harder for AI to replicate that skill in the intermediate term than it is to say, all right, if there's one right answer, AI can find that much quicker right now.
Yeah. Yeah, but to your point, I think that so much of it is also being able to see the noise, filter it out, come up with an idea about what you believe is going to be true or false, and then defend it. And
Yes.
that's all communicating.
Or it's just a different set of
We're looking at the
analytical
yield curve.
skills.
We know what we think is going to happen, but like we don't actually know. Whatever your freaking take is, you have to be able to defend it. Like it's synthesizing all this information and then being able to put it into like
and synthesizing articles like this, by the way, doesn't mean you should go out and switch your major to English to try to stand a better chance in finance. No, right? This is noise. What can you glean from this? Be different, right? So it's the exact same thing. Yeah. This is not a prescription. This is just one additional data point that you should factor in and maybe use it to substantiate what we've been saying all along, which is, like you said, be different, be interesting. Do not just be another cookie cutter. I'm sorry to say it, but like STEM, finance, math major who doesn't have anything else to show that they might bring to bear an additional perspective.
Yeah. And again, I am very pro science. I love everything about it. I think it's fascinating. I mean, to the extent that you are interested in finance, if your brain works that way, you should continue to do that. The only B I got was in Spanish literature, right? Because that's not like, I'm not good at doing that stuff. But that's why, I mean, I can be good at the stuff that I'm good at. And then we need the people that are good at the other stuff. Like you need to have that diversity. So I do think it's important for these banks to be hiring people with that broad background, but also you should go with what you are best at. Jen, I know
and what
you
excites you? What makes you intellectually fulfilled and emotionally fulfilled?
Yeah.
And you're just going to be a better applicant for any job if you have been thriving intellectually in college versus just thinking you're checking some box.
Yeah. No, that's so true. I mean, the worst thing you can do, you know, you have 4 years and gosh, the price tag of college these days is coming close to $100,000 a year. So whatever you're studying, like you should be excited about learning whatever it is. And for a lot of people, it is going to be literature. It is going to be art history. It is going to be these different things. And figuring out what you enjoy. And there's no right or wrong answer. At the end of the day, so much of what you're doing in an interview is being able to sell yourself as a great candidate. And again, Jen, you were able to do that with your English degree, and you were able to express how studying what you had studied actually was making you the best candidate.
Sure, and but
everything's about spinning a story. I don't care.
I also got very lucky.
It's all about spinning a story. So
you know what today is, by the way, speaking of ancient history, today is hang on, I'm going to do the math. It's the 19-year anniversary of when I had my first half day off, whatever, during my summer internship. And I remember being like, what am I going to do with all this free time? Because the summer internship was so all consuming, even though I was in sales and trading. You were expected, obviously, to be the first in on the desk and the last out or whatever, you know, to show how much you cared. And I remember walking out of Morgan Stanley's office on 1585 Broadway and walking up to Columbus Circle. And I went and saw Batman Begins in the theater alone. And it was so freaking good. I still remember it to this day.
I think that's also when I visited you in New York.
Did you come July 4th weekend? Is that right?
Star. I'm pretty sure, yeah. Because otherwise, why?
That sounds right.
I'm 99.9% sure. Yeah. And I took the Lucky Star bus. It was $10 because I was too cheap to spring for a freaking Greyhound, which was like $15. And then as I was driving, they got a flat and the tire caught on fire. And so I was stuck on the side of the highway for, 2-3 hours. This is before the invention of Uber. So we were just stuck there waiting for them to send another bus. And then they sent another bus, but there were people on it. So not everyone fit. And it was just such a nightmare. It took no less than 8 hours to get from Boston to New York. And I had just turned 21. So I had my fake ID. True story. Actually, this is hilarious. I have to tell the story. So I had this he's not really my uncle. He's my first cousin once removed, which we can get into at a later point. But he's my second cousin who I'm very close with. It's her dad. And he's kind of this eccentric dude. Speaking of engineers, he was an MIT grad. He was friends with, they lived in California. His neighbor / mentee was this dude who had started to create fake IDs but they were scannable. And so he said to me, he's like, do you want a fake ID? And I was like, oh, yes, I do. Yes, I do. So I got a fake ID because at Brown, you're in Providence and it's like a sad little city, but it's still a proper city. And so the nightlife, you go to bar. So I needed a fake ID. Anyway, so I got a fake ID and it worked. It scanned. It was beautiful. And I actually remember taking that ID and giving it to you. And clearly it didn't work for you because you didn't look enough like me, which is like the funniest thing because now everyone thinks we're the same person.
Yes.
Yeah. But the best part of that, well, it's not the best part. This guy, though, apparently, so the person who made my fake ID bragged in Wired magazine about how it was so easy to make fake IDs. So then he got arrested because he was bragging about it. Like, you dumbass. So anyway, that's the story of my
And for
fake
whoever
ID
is listening to this podcast, please don't throw us in jail for Kristen having used a fake ID in the year 20.
Oh my God, everybody used, like, there was
2003.
Every single college kid, at least at Brown, had a fake ID. Like, you basically were not part of the nightlife if you didn't have a fake ID. Mm-hmm. Although there was this one bar that was, so back then too, it was recent that they had moved the licenses from being horizontal to vertical. So if you were
they made them vertical for a while, right? Or it was like you were vertical when you got your learner's permit, and then you went horizontal when you got your license or something in Massachusetts.
So under 21, you were vertical. So I had a vertical license. And I remember there was this one bar, I think it was called Paragon. And I remember I would go and I was able, this is before I got my fake ID, I would give them my, vertical license, whatever. And it always worked. And I remember saying to someone like, yeah, Paragon, it's a 18 plus bar. They're like, no, it's not. It's 21 plus. I'm like, well, why are they letting me in? So anyway, I don't know why. They just didn't give a shit. You were underage. I'm like, sure.
Oh my God, that's hilarious.
But anyway, so that's a fun trip down memory lane. But yeah, so anyway, for those of you guys who are listening, happy July 4th. So this weekend,
drink responsibly if you have a fake ID.
Yes. We are going to be doing our part 2 of Succession, no, let me rephrase. We're doing Succession Season 3, Part 2, which I think might be one of my all-time favorite things that we have recorded together. Like,
best episode of all time.
It was
best episode of all time.
The best episode.
Unintentionally,
yeah. So
I have
we get
cried
into
laughing, editing it.
Basically, we get into, obviously, the second half of Season 3 of Succession. Tons of finance. We get into merger of equals. We get into, consideration in an M&A deal. It is very finance heavy, unlike some of the past ones where it's been a little more in the drama. This is very finance heavy, but it is a blast. So definitely check that out. And anything else, Jen? Any other?
One more thing. If you participated in our review contest, we will be selecting the winner tomorrow, July 5th. So please keep a lookout on our Instagram, and we'll be sharing the name there of the lucky winner. And thank you so much to everyone who participated, and we'll have another one probably in a couple of months.
Awesome. Well, thanks, guys. We'll see you soon.
Bye, guys.
Bye.